Good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Audit Committee. I'm Counselor Jennifer Millar-Smith and I am chair of this committee. This meeting is being live streamed via the Council's YouTube channel as a trial. Please note that there is no comment function available on the live stream during the meeting. Once finished, the recording will be uploaded to the same YouTube channel. You should be aware that the Council is the data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during the webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published retention policy. I will remind committee members and officers to be mindful, given that this meeting is being live streamed, to please ensure that any comments made and responses given do not contain exempt information. And I think if you aren't sure, members, please do ask in advance and they'll let us know. Councilors are reminded to take notice of what is displayed on the screens in the room as these show what is being recorded. Please can councilors remain seated when speaking as the cameras are currently set to capture seated positions. Please do not move the microphone too close to you. To request to speak as usual, please raise your hand clearly and I will maintain an order of speakers. To speak, you will need to press the button with the face on it. The microphone will go green when you are live. And also, just please, when you're finished speaking, remember to turn off your mic. There are no scheduled fire drills tonight, so in the event of a fire alarm activation, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main entrance doors. Should this route not be accessible, the secondary route is via the main spiral staircase across the contact center and through the doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point located beyond the multi-story car park on Exchange Road. If you're unable to see the stairs, please wait in this room and you will be guided by a member of staff to the evacuation lift. I request that all mobile phones are put on silent and/or put away. Okay. So, apologies for absence. We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Belbin and apologies for lateness from Councillor Sheridan. Have we received any more apologies for absence?
We have not, Chair.
Everyone else has. Okay, fine. Thank you. Disclosures of interest, item 2. Are there any disclosures of interest councillors wish to declare? Okay. And I'll check again in case any other councillors arrive. Minutes. So for the minutes of the previous meeting, which, sorry, I'm not keeping up with my scrolling here, held on the 21st of November, 2023, the independent person has requested that a change be made to minute 7, the internal audit progress report of the minutes, namely that the following bullet point be added to the discussion points raised on that item. Noted that, whilst checking sign-off from the legal department on any agreement with vendors had not been reviewed in the contract management audit, that procedure would be incorporated into future audits concerning vendor management. I therefore propose that the minutes of the meeting of the Audit Committee held on 21st November 2023 be approved subject to that amendment if that is agreed. Agreed? And no other comments on that? Okay, so then the minutes of the meeting are agreed with that, with the amendments included. Thank you for joining us. Councillor, can I just ask, please, do you have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. Item 4 is public question time. We do not have any members of the public with us this evening, so we will move on to, am I going to do this? Yeah, okay, make a note of it, yeah. So we did have, as requested, because we have such large agendas, I obviously ask where possible for people to submit perhaps questions that need to be, have the information gathered for them or anything in advance to be put to officers in advance of the meeting. We had a significant number of questions submitted by committee in advance of tonight's meeting, and for openness and transparency, these questions, along with their responses, were published this afternoon as the supplementary agenda, which you all have, members have. Move on to item 5, the auditor's annual report for the year ended 31st of March, 2022. And it starts on page 11 of the agenda pack. And I will ask Elizabeth Jackson from Ernst & Young to please present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read because it's quite lengthy, and considering the number of questions, I feel like it has been read by everyone in the room. Just really to give us a couple of highlights that we finally issued the 21-22 audit report for obviously the 21-22 accounts and value for money opinion on the 25th of January 2024, and that was an unqualified true and fair view of the council's accounts and the value for money, the same kind of positive confirmation that there were no exceptions to report on the value for money arrangements in the 21-22 year. One of the questions asked was around the certificate, and obviously on page 14 of our report, we've said that we can't issue the certificate which kind of closes the whole audit year at this time, and that's due to the whole of government accounts work. The National Audit Office, obviously because of the delays in so much of the audit, they're still doing the 21-22 accounts, obviously as they everyone is finishing their own audits, and they have reserved the right to be able to ask auditors any questions that they need when they're carrying out that whole of government accounts work. I don't think we'll get any questions from Crawley because of the size of Crawley. If you think about everyone that's consolidated into the whole of government accounts, there's much larger bodies out there in local government, and therefore they don't usually ask questions at that district borough council level. But we're not allowed to issue the audit certificate until we've had that confirmation to say that that's the case. But there's nothing, no questions can be asked of those accounts. They're audited, your inspection period closed, obviously a long, long time ago, and therefore there's nothing more work-wise that we would need to do. If that is it. And then, sorry, I'll just take any other questions. I don't think there was any. Is there any other questions on that report? Check. Oh, there were two more, sorry. There was a question regarding the risk in revenue recognition, and has the auditor verified that grants, that grants are recognised as income only when they adhere to the conditions attached? Yes, that's actually been a really interesting point raised, and it's something that we haven't done in previous years. We've just looked at the actual grant and should you recognise the grant income, but actually one of the challenges from a quality inspection was around actually have you tested the actual expenditure incurred, and therefore you are then correct to actually recognise that grant. So yes, that is part of the audit test that we do to confirm that terms and conditions have been met. And obviously if you haven't, I don't think there are any amendments in your 21-22 accounts, but that is one of the common amendments we see in financial statements, is that councils have recognised all of the grant or recognised it in a section of the accounts that they shouldn't have because there are terms and conditions and they may have to return that grant at some point. So that is one of the tests that we do to ensure that the accounts are fairly stated. Then the only other question was around, has the auditor considered the risk of cut-off errors for expenditure at year end? And yes, that's the standard test that we do up to the date in which I give the audit report to say, are there any liabilities arising that should be in the financial statements that haven't yet been occurred? Obviously, where you've got the delay in the audit report being issued in January 2024, obviously we do at a very high level by that point because you've produced another set of accounts in between that, and therefore there's very unlikely that something has been identified since that should have been in 21-22, but up to say the September following the year end, we do that test at quite a detailed level of the payments being made out of the council, and actually should you have recognised anything in the year, because obviously that is one way, less so in local government, but that is one way to manipulate your year end financial position if you move things to a different financial year from what it should be recognised in. And then I'll just welcome any other questions.
Thank you for that report. Are there any other questions on this item? Actually, you were probably just going to ask about...
a couple of questions with the officers. Yeah, I have a couple of questions from the officers regarding weaknesses that has been identified. So, yes. So one of the point mentioned in audit report was a recommendation to implement robust quality verification process for preparing financial statement. So I was just wondering if you can provide detail action plan, if you have an action plan for this, and what's the timeline for completion?
Sorry, Chair, I feel that's a question for officers and not for me. But
yes, it is for officers.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, so there are two weaknesses have been identified by the auditors in their report. One relating to the verification process for preparing financial statements, and the other is cybersecurity training. So I was just wondering what is our response to these two observations?
I'm sorry, you please press the microphone.
Oh, there, that one's great. We're just coming up to sort of closing this year end, and as part of that, we'll be introducing sort of new processes, including a robust timetable and looking at how we do everything, including a spreadsheet model for doing the accounts and verifying all the figures that in there, and sort of so that we know one figure goes in one place, it filters all the way through. So yes, we're doing a lot in a sort of preparation for closing this year end that will answer hopefully those issues.
What page is the cybersecurity training on, please?
I think it's page 21, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Right, okay, so this talks about internal audit reviews, and yes, I think the cybersecurity training is up to date now, but obviously it's a sort of rolling program.
Is it for all staff members, or is it a group of?
Yes, it's for all the staff members. Is it for members as well? Yeah. Oh, and for elected members as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members on this item? Okay. Thank you. As all committee members have had the opportunity to speak, the recommendation is that the report be received and noted. Do we all agree with the recommendation? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. The recommendation has therefore been carried, and we will move on to item 6, which is the value for money interim report, year ended 31st of March 2023. And that starts on page 39 of the agenda pack. And again, please, Elizabeth Jackson from Ernst & Young, if you would present the report for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll take the report as read, but just to give a bit of context to kind of the value for money reporting, because it is the first time we've done a value for money interim report to you. And I think, as discussed at obviously previous audit committees with you, obviously we haven't undertaken the 22-23 accounts, and with the DLUC and National Audit Office consultations, which closed last week, obviously they're looking at the whole of the audit market and kind of what can happen with councils' audits that are obviously kind of, in some cases, many years behind. So EY's focus has been on kind of auditing pension funds and carrying out the value for money work, because we've determined that actually that's a really important source of assurance for members of this council and actually council wider, and the members of the public, to actually see what's actually happening at the council and do they have the arrangements kind of underpinning everything. So when they're setting budgets, actually have they got sources of assurance that those budgets are robust. So that's the work, and that's what we put in this value for money interim report. And it's an interim report because obviously it's a point in time now for March, and obviously while the DLUC consultation and then the legislation is passed over the summer for what is happening with the 22-23 financial statements, we'll then bring an auditor's annual report as normal to kind of summarise the whole of the 22-23 financial year, probably to the September committee. But the work is complete. kind of on the headlines for all the arrangements that are in the appendix in this report. Builds on obviously the work Div 21-22, because obviously that's only been signed off recently, and therefore it's quite, we've kind of combined the years and the arrangements, haven't changed overly in that period. One thing that we're still doing is the review of the town hall scheme, and obviously the lovely building we're sat in now, just to say actually what is it. Officers have indicated obviously there were disputes in that, and obviously we're just going to look at that. I won't say any more because it's work in progress, and obviously we're live as it currently is. And then just to say that actually there's no significant weaknesses identified in the work to date. We're actually, I think the arrangements are robust. Obviously there are concerns for the financial pressures on the council, particularly around the Jagosians risk that's obviously well reported at the council. But from our perspective, although that would leave a huge budget gap obviously for you, actually the council is doing everything from an arrangements perspective to kind of lobby government and seek money to ensure that's covered. So actually from our perspective, although there is a risk to the budget, you're doing everything you can from an arrangements perspective to actually underpin that as it currently stands. From a governance perspective, there's nothing identified to date around the work that we've done. I think everything has kind of continued on. Internal Audit have given reasonable assurance over that year, and therefore that gives us some comfort from the work they've carried out. And you published your draft 22-23 financial statements by kind of the timescale in which you should have done. And then on the town hall also feeds into the economy, efficiency and effectiveness area, and we'll update at a later date on that. And then I'm happy to take any questions that any members have.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. Do any committee members have any questions? No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So as all committee members have had the opportunity to speak, the recommendation is that the report be received and noted. Are the committee members in agreement with that recommendation? Agreed. Okay, the recommendation has therefore been carried. So we will move on to item 7, which is accounting policies 2023-24 and 2024-25, which starts on page 65 of the agenda pack. And I will ask Vicky Basley, the Chief Accountant, to please present this report.
Thank you. So just bringing you the accounting policies for 23-24 and the year ahead. The Audit Committee is charged with responsibility for the oversight of financial reporting, so they're brought to you sort of to review and approve. They're sort of the principles and practices used to prepare and present the financial statements, so sort of how we prepare the accounts. And they comply with SIPFA's Code of Practice on local authority accounting. And they form Note 1 to the Statement of Accounts. So it's good practice for us to bring them to you now for the year ahead. So what you've got is the 23-24 accounting policies, and then any sort of changes for 24-25 that sort of been issued but not yet adopted. So effectively they're the accounting policies for the year ahead, and that's sort of good practice. So it's sort of us starting to sort of, turn things around and improve the governance around the statement of accounts. So that's what they are. I see there's a couple of questions. Did you want me to pick those questions up?
Yes, please. The unanswered questions. Thank you.
Yes, I think both of those on the accounting policies. So have we introduced any new accounting policies during the year, or have there been any changes to the accounting policies? So the only one where sort of real change that we've been an early adopter of is the IFRS 16, which is to do with leases and bringing right of use assets onto the balance sheet. Now, it's not sort of compulsory till the 1st of April this year. So I learnt the other day that Crawley was sort of one of only 2 early adopters of this. So that sort of that happened in 22-23, but I'm conscious that we haven't sort of had the 22-23 accounts to approve. So that's the change from 21-22. So that's sort of the only change on that one. And then the second question is, we have 2 accounting policies relevant to financial assets measured at fair value through profit and loss. And which class of assets in the financial statements do these policies pertain to? So those relate to our sort of financial instruments notes, and there's a couple of areas in our investments which for 21-22 were gilts, where the value of them can change in the year, so we have to value them at year end at the market value at that point. Most of our other investments, where we say invest with other local authorities, it's a fixed interest rate which doesn't move. So it's the items where they're sort of variable in the year that we will measure them at the end of the year for their market value at that rate, and any difference would be taken through the profit and loss account. So there's two areas. There's investments, and there was some sort of shared equity we have in a number of properties where we've got a small percentage, but our share again is variable in the year. So it relates to those two items. So. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Are you finished with the presentation? Okay, so I will invite committee members to now ask any questions, and please go ahead.
Thank you. So I think for guilt is fine. The other one you said that is a property investment in property.
Not investment property. It's where we own a share of some properties. Not being 100% familiar with everything that we own at the moment, but it's a residential, so it's not shared ownership, but it's where we've got a sort of an equity share in some properties.
Equity share. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members? Thank you. I would just note as well that regarding IFRS 16, we knew that was sort of coming forward. That was included in a sort of training session presentation that we had for committee members. So I don't remember when we did that, but we did have that included for our information. Okay. As all committee members have had the opportunity to speak, the recommendations are that the committee confirm it is satisfied with the adequacy of the accounting policies set out in the appendix to the report, and approve the accounting policies that will be applied to the 2023-24 and 24-25 financial statements. Do we all agree with these recommendations? Agreed. Okay, thank you. The recommendation has therefore been carried. We will now move on to item 8, the internal progress report, which begins on page 85 of the agenda pack. And I will ask Caroline Martlew, Head of Corporate Finance, to present the report of the Council's internal auditors.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just for the committee members to note that Iona Bond is on leave, so I've sort of stepped off to take the report for her, but she's not in the background answering questions, which she would normally do, but I think she's provided quite comprehensive replies to the questions that were raised before the meeting. So on to the progress report. The report sets out the progress as of the end of January on the 23-24 audit plan. Salient points from each of the sections. Section 1 to 3, the performance dashboard. The first box on the left, progress against the plan is good and on track to deliver all the annual audit report. And we're hoping no carry forward this year, because I think there was quite a sort of backlog last year. Then section 4, analysis of live audit reviews. Summary of those finalised audit reviews where there are management actions remaining to be completed. Split into those not yet due and those that are overdue. Pleasing to note the low number of management actions in total. Some long-standing overdue management actions are now beginning to be cleared. Appendix 1 and 2 will summarise any that are overdue. Section 5 is the executive summaries. No finalised reports where a limited or no assurance opinion has been given since the last progress report. Section 6, planning and resourcing. Further adjustments to the plan since the last progress report as set out in Section 8. Removed commercial properties, car parking and information governance. Added accounts receivable and debt management. And community services regulatory compliance. These changes have been made in consultation with the corporate management team. We're satisfied that the revised plan remains sufficient in order that an annual opinion can be formed at the end of the year. Then Section 7 covers the rolling work programme. All quarter 1 work has been finalised. Quarter 2, only one review remains at draft report stage. All are otherwise complete. All Q3 work is nearing completion, and all quarter 4 work has been scoped. And I think when you think where we were last year, you can see the improvement there. Section 8, adjustments to the plan. Summary of those areas removed from the plan with the rationale. Nothing of concern to note. Annex 1 and 2, a listing out of the overdue management actions. Satisfied that progress being made on these and appropriate revised target dates have been set. And just to note that all HR management actions have been removed, as these have now been superseded as incorporated into the People Transformation Programme. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I will just ask first, before going out generally to committee members, that there are several questions, item 15 through item 20 of this report, where we don't yet have an answer, because one hasn't been able to be provided yet. I just wondered if you were in a position to answer any of those questions, or if we should wait for Iona to answer them, and we can include it in the Council's Information Bulletin, correct? It's in the supplementary agenda, questions 15 through 20. And just while I'm waiting for that, I welcome Vice Chair Councillor Cheriton. Do you have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I think these were the ones that came in at 6 o'clock this morning, and unfortunately I've been in sort of back-to-back meetings all day, so I haven't really been able to spend as much time on these as I would normally have. I think it would take quite a long time for me to read through these, so if I may, if I could give written responses this once, and then next time we'll cover them.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will include those, Democratic Services will include those for us in the Council's Information Bulletin. Are there any other questions on this report other than what we prior submitted? Yes, Councillor Hellier.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for producing the answers to this. It's very helpful. I think just one of the observations that I make is that some of the questions that were actually asked, I think if we had sort of made use in the presentation of comments or just a little update in there, we probably wouldn't have asked the questions in the first place that have been responded to. So I just wondered if there was any sort of takeaway that we could get from this to perhaps provide the assurance that you're reassuring us that everything has been done on various things and good progress is being made, but we had to ask the questions because it wasn't evident in what was presented, if you understand what I'm saying in that. So I asked questions which if comments would have been made, then I probably wouldn't have asked them because it would have been self-explanatory, if that makes sense.
Through the chair, yes. I mean, I'm quite happy to take it up with the Southern Internal Audit Partnership. I mean, these are their sort of standard reports, but if Crawley requires something slightly more bespoke, then I'm sure, you know, if we have the discussion, that she can include more of that in the reports. I mean, I don't see any problem with that. Yeah.
Perhaps one thing to do is to have a look at maybe the types of questions that have come through perhaps the last couple of meetings and see if there's any way, based on those questions, that we could alter the report. And perhaps there isn't, but that might be one way for you to get an idea of the types of questions the committee is asking, and if there's sort of a pattern almost to that, then perhaps there's a way we can, you know, do something with the report in that way.
And I think with the new sort of municipal year, when we hold the audit committee training, SIAP will be there to sort of explain some of their processes as well, which will set the stage a bit better for members, and you'll get the same sort of training from EY as well. So hopefully with that and beefing up the reports a bit, we'll get to a position where we can, you know, have less questions on the night.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Mr. Hall?
Just one observation. I understand there is no limited assurance report this quarter, but I was just thinking, is it possible for you to send us all audit reports when it is completed? So even if it is, so if,
as a council, we don't share the internal audit reports because they're internal working documents.
okay. So the reason I'm saying it, if we have an opinion which is limited, we know what's the problem. But if there's no problem, we can ask questions like what procedure was performed, whether risk is adequately covered. And so I think from my perspective, there is more risk for the committee for those audits where there's no weaknesses identified than where internal audit has identified some weaknesses. So yeah, I think we can discuss it later and come to a conclusion whether this can be distributed to the audit committee. But I think in my past experience, auditors and the audit committee have access to the audit reports, all audit reports. So
I'm not aware of councils that distribute internal audit reports. I would say you would get reports if there were sort of significant failings, because then, you know, you say there was a major fraud or something, but not the day-to-day ones. But perhaps we can sort of have a meeting to discuss why you'd want to see them, because you have got to be mindful of the difference of having professional auditors and the role of the audit committee, which is a sort of strategic overview function. And I really wouldn't want you to be sort of being bogged down with internal audit reports, but I think we can cover that subject.
Okay, I'll call you in just a second, Councillor Hilliard, but I think maybe we should have a discussion about this. I'm not necessarily sure that the reports need to come to the committee, but it does make me question whether reports should be accessible to councillors. the committee know what I'm saying by that, rather than necessarily we need to get the report sent to us. But it does make me wonder about whether internal audit reports should be accessible to counselors. But I do think that we could potentially have a discussion offline a bit about this. Councillor Hellier?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was really sort of in relation to my question, because obviously I have a banking background and used to working with audit and regulatory sort of functions, and it's the assurance I think that we need that things are correct. So go back to if there had been what I said, if there had been comments there, that would have provided the assurance in a different way. So if that can be tweaked, I think that would also suffice, rather than having the actual audit reports. Because that would give us the assurance that we require. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members? No. Okay. I have one question that I hope I haven't missed the answer to it in thinking about all sorts of other things earlier. But for the contract management on it's page 11 of the report, but page 97 of the pack, and moving on to page 98, the revised due date was the 31st of January, and we have the latest service update, but has that been completed? Do we know? It's on page 98 and 97, contract management. And it basically, the due date was the 30th of November, revised due date 31st of Jan.
Yes, that's the one about the contracts register. Yes, they've been reviewed, and it's a sort of a quarterly process now.
Okay, sorry, you probably already answered that, and I'm just missing it. Okay, if all committee members have an opportunity to speak, and the recommendation is that the report be received and that progress to date as at 31st of January 2024 be noted. Do we all agree with that recommendation? Yes? Okay, thank you. So the recommendation has therefore been carried, and I will discuss perhaps with Democratic Services about having some way for us to give opinions on some of the other things that we've discussed in this meeting today. Okay. So we move to item 9, which is the Internal Audit Charter 2024-2025, which starts
Sorry,
on...
Chair, could I just, pennies just dropped on what you've said. I mean, obviously, the Audit Committee may be reconstituted, but will any conversations you have then be recorded for the next committee?
I think we have time to have this committee form an opinion on it, if you all are happy to have some brief discussions on it, not necessarily in person, but we can have a form of discussion on it. And then that would go forward to what would happen or what would be available for the new committee, the next committee. Alternatively, we could just leave it and see what happens with the next committee, but I sort of feel like if we just try and form an opinion ourselves, unless the committee has other feelings on it.
I think definitely if we form an opinion before the end of the committee, I mean, if we do that perhaps on the online discussion, then it's not lost. People don't start from scratch.
That would be why I would prefer if we try and get it done, because otherwise the next committee, we could go through all this again, and it's like, better not, even if it's not us. Yeah, okay, thank you. So we're moving to the item 9, Internal Audit Charter 2024-25, starting on page 103 of the agenda pack. And again, please, I will ask Caroline Martley, our Head of Corporate Finance, to present the reports for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. All I've got to say is, as per the requirements of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, the committee is required to annually approve the Internal Audit Charter. Presented for approval is the Charter for 2024-25, for which there are no significant changes from the Charter 2023-24. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for presenting that. I think we have a few questions from sorry? Yes, I think hers have been answered. I think we have a few unanswered questions that came in this morning, 21 through 23, if that's correct. And again, I don't know if you want to see if you can answer those now or if you'd prefer to answer them later, but, and then I'll move on to any other questions.
So just one thing, my main concern is just that where, I think in the charter it is written that senior management approve audit plan. I think auditor, internal auditor should be independent to senior management. They should be directly they should directly report to the audit committee. So I think that was, all the three questions I have, that was my main concern. So they shouldn't be reportable, shouldn't report to senior management. And they shouldn't be involved in the approval of audit plan. It should be internal auditor and then audit committee.
Do our officers want to say anything about that?
Yeah. I think I'll give you a written answer and I'll discuss it with SIAP, but I don't see how that can be practical because you have to agree the plan with the officers because we act on your behalf. I mean, the way it's sort of structured is, they look at the risk register to identify our sort of high value risks, so they make sure that those are covered. Then there are also the sort of statutory things like the rolling programs, if you like, the key financial systems, and it all works towards having this sort of reasonable audit assurance rating at the end of the year, which goes with the annual governance statement and the accounts. So I do believe the processes are sound, and this is the way it's done at every other council. But I mean, it might just be the way it's written that we need to sort of clarify that.
Yes, I think the problem. I mean, I have a problem with the word approval. That the senior management approve the audit plan. I think that is, they can be consulted, they can have their view, whatever, but the approval authority should sit with the audit committee, not with the senior management.
Yes, and I totally agree, and that's why the audit plan comes to this committee. So I think we're okay with this.
Okay, so perhaps it is a form of wording that is causing some confusion, and maybe we can just tighten up on that word.
I think there's no fundamental problem with the processes.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Hawk.
But in a practical term, what influence do you have on the internal auditor? So can you propose any change in the audit plan based or
the way it's done is followed quite common kind of protocol in councils, and actually internal audit works best when it's done planned. The audit plan is planned with the organisation. So we talked about the wording, the heads of service, so the senior management team, they are involved in identifying areas that obviously they feel need audit, and obviously, as Caroline said, the internal auditor suggests things that need to happen and need to be audited on a cycle. But it's also to do with capacity as well, both on the internal auditor side and the people who are being audited or participating in the audit. They need to have the capacity to participate, provide all the necessary information at that time in the programme. So if it's in that quarter, it can't conflict with things like council tax bills going out or major operational things that are happening in the year. So it is a collective kind of effort to try and put together a programme that will provide the right kind of level of internal audit, but also is workable. So it's not quite senior management approve it, but they agree that it's workable is probably more likely. But it's quite appropriate for them to be involved in that planning process rather than it being done in isolation.
Yes, I have absolutely no problem with the involvement. I think there should be. It's just independent audit, internal auditor should independently, make their view about the audit plan. But that's the only thing. It's fine. Thank you.
And I believe they do. They bring forward what they.
I think in your report, obviously, they're expressing that they're satisfied with the audit plan. I think if they found resistance within the organisation against things that they were suggesting, then I think they would report that to you. It's just that they're not saying that.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair, Councillor Sheridan, you have a question?
I did. I think what our colleague is. I think what you're saying is that what your concern seems to be of the independence of an internal audit. Understand the mechanisms and the need for the processes, and absolutely, the heads of organisations and people within the organisation obviously need to be involved with it. I guess it's that oversight element, ensuring, because how can we say, obviously we trust our officers, but there's a over and above that, it's a question. There should be procedures and mechanisms to ensure that there isn't a possibility that an audit can miss out a vital area, either by accident or by design, I think, and therefore having some sort of independent oversight to say, query and say, well, what about this area, and has that been looked at in enough detail, and so on. If you see what I mean, that's where I think you're coming from, and I sort of understand that. So I don't know whether you have a comment on that.
I think there's probably something in the professional view of the internal auditor, and maybe we talked earlier about the reports and whether we're getting the right messaging across, and we can probably look at the content, because ideally what should be happening is you're reading those reports and you're seeing an independent view. Obviously this is internal audit. At this time the council outsources that, obviously, so it's an outsourced internal audit, so it's probably more external than it could be, but ultimately I think it probably does come down to it is their professional view. And perhaps we need to look at just making sure that that's coming across from your perspective, so you're satisfied. The other thing is that the external auditor obviously keeps an eye on our internal audit function, and I assume if they felt that it wasn't quite challenging us, they would have something to say, I would have thought.
Yes, and when you sort of look at the contents of the charter, it does explain how they achieve independence, and I think maybe as part of because we didn't have the training session, so they would have sort of explained all of this, because you would have gone through all these processes when you took on the Southern Internal Audit Partnership, because they've obviously got their professional standards. I don't think there's any issue around sort of independence, because they're not our employees and they have professional standards. And if you look at the sort of the list of clients that they have, they wouldn't have that number of clients. And as you said, the external auditors, although they don't sort of use them to do the sort of walkthroughs and things anymore, because all that's sort of changed because of the analytics, they do look at the annual governance statement, and they do check that we do have a reasonable assurance rating at the end of the year, so that you would be hearing negative things. I mean, the fact that you're not hearing any positives is just the way the system is structured. I think there are no warning bells. Your internal auditors are professional, and I'll get Iona to answer this properly next time we have a meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I would just note as well on page 109 of the charter, no, yes, I think it's page 109 of the charter, there is a section on independence and objectivity that lists through various items. So, do any other committee members have any questions this time? Okay, thank you very much. So all committee members have had the opportunity to speak, and the recommendation is that the committee approve the internal audit charter for 2024-25 as attached to the report. Do we all agree with the recommendation? Okay.
Subject to a change in the wording where we have internal audit approve, senior management approve internal audit plan. I think that need to be amended. That's it.
Would we be happy with agree?
What I'm saying is, I think we agree that there will be a wording change. The word approve by senior management will be removed. Internal audit plan approved by the senior management, just to show that they are independent.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Would you be happy with the word agreed?
All
Yeah,
right.
sorry, that's what I meant. Are we happy to substitute approve with agree?
Yeah. Okay.
Then I'm happy.
Okay, okay, so we'll make sure that that approve is changed to agreed.
We'll have to fight it out.
Yeah, that's right. And, I mean, also, you know, there, as I say, there is a list of how they achieve independence objectivity. And some of that does set out quite clear, I think, the distance between senior management and the internal auditors when you read through it. So, okay, thank you. So that recommendation has therefore been carried with that amendment. We'll move on to item 10, internal audits annual plan 2024-25, which starts on page 115 of the agenda pack. And again, Caroline, you're getting all the fun tonight. I will ask Caroline Martley, our head of corporate finance, to please present the report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I will make sure that Iona's here for the next one, and then she can answer your questions a little bit more fully. Okay, so the report presented sets out the proposed audit plan for 2024-25 for the Council. The plan has been drawn up following a full audit needs assessment, including consideration of the Council's corporate risk register, findings from the previous year's internal audit coverage, and taking into account any audits postponed from the current year. In drawing up the plan, we discussed the audit needs assessment with all heads of service and senior management team. As always, the plan will remain fluid during the year, and any changes will be brought to this committee via the audit progress report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that report. I would note again, in the supplementary agenda, there are, for this item, questions 25 and 26, which are to be answered still. But I don't know if, well, 26 looks like it might be needing to be answered a little more fully. But 25 and 26, if you feel able to answer them, otherwise we will wait and have something put into the information bulletin.
I'm sorry, I think these are directly related to SIAP, and it wouldn't be right for me to answer those.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other questions from the committee members? No? Okay. So thank you very much. And all committee members have had an opportunity to speak. The recommendation is that the committee approve the internal audit plan for 2024-25 as attached to the report. Do we all agree with that recommendation? Agreed. Okay, the recommendation has therefore been carried. And we will now move to item 11, the risk management update, which starts on page 127 of the agenda pack. And I will now ask Anna Pedlow, the Corporate Performance Manager, to please present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the risk management update is obviously for this committee to review the action taken by the corporate management team and staff to mitigate strategic risks. So if I just sort of direct you more to section 7 of the report, which is update since the last audit committee, which was on the 21st of November. So the first risk is risk 4, which is homelessness. Just to point out, obviously, the questions in advance of the meeting, obviously some questions around sort of the scoring of that risk. So what I will say is that we have actually taken those points on board, and we have actually reviewed the homelessness risk. The reason there wasn't a change to this report is that this was last updated prior to the council's declaration of a housing emergency. So obviously we have now agreed that we should now raise the risk to 25 to provide consistency with this risk score, so that's no controls. And that obviously links in with where we did similarly with the climate emergency risk as well, which was also declared by the council. So just to sort of clarify, the current post-mitigation risk was recently increased to 20 and is allied to the post-mitigation score applied to the risk for the council in maintaining a balanced budget. And just to say, the council continues to actively lobby government for increased financial support, and there is evidence that this is gaining traction through the allocation of additional funding for local authorities impacted by those granted British citizenship through association with the British Indian Ocean territories wishing to settle in this country, and the increase in local housing allowance levels with effect from April for the first time since 2011. Therefore, an increase of this score to 25 would reflect that the impact to the council had increased to the point where it was considered to be catastrophic. So that will be obviously updated in our risk register going forward. So obviously we've taken that on board and that will be updated. The next point is in relation to risk 9, maintaining a balanced budget. So the risk score post-mitigation has been increased from 15 to 20. This reflects the worsening financial budget position reported in the Q3 budget monitoring report. Cost pressures include the above budget pay settlement and other inflationary pressures. We have housing benefit and the town hall district heat network. However, the greatest cost pressure is in the homelessness service, which is in relation to temporary accommodation, which we reported an additional cost pressure of 3.6 million. So again, that was reflected in the homelessness update as well, but obviously we've reflected the score there. And obviously its anticipated cost pressures will continue in the budget for 24-25. The next update, risk 15, which is the cost of living risk. There was a recommendation from the last audit committee for corporate management team to review the risk description so that it reflected how the council's inability to support residents might impact the council's ability to provide services to its residents. Corporate management team has reviewed this risk, which has taken an inward view, so that's the impact on council finances and the financial risk posed, which is covered by maintaining a balanced budget. An outward view is the impact on the customer in terms of their ability to cope and manage. I will have to point out that there was a clerical error reported in terms of the post-mitigation score. It was changed from 15 because it was previously 16, but it should actually be 12 post-mitigation. And it's just to sort of point out that, we're aware that arrears are increasing, so in terms of outstanding rent, but the council cannot determine how much is attributable to the cost of living. So more intelligence is needed on both rent and council tax arrears, so data gathering is being undertaken to help further develop our understanding. So we will obviously keep an eye on this risk. So we are still keeping that the score without controls is considered 16, which is major and probable, as it is not as high as the balanced budget risk, which is catastrophic, and the mitigations reduce the risk to 12, so that will obviously be updated in the register. That was just a clerical error. And, you know, as we've said, we will keep this under review once the data has been gathered to determine if that needs to be reflected there. The final point, risk 17, was just in relation to damp and mould. It's just to give an update what is happening there. The risk scores remain unchanged, but it's just to sort of provide an update in terms of the work that's happening. So task teams have been put in place to provide a holistic response for complex cases. These teams include a surveyor, housing officer and financial inclusion officer. For all cases, teams are continuing to provide advice about heating and issuing energy vouchers where appropriate to encourage better heating of homes and mini dehumidifiers and window vacs where relevant. RWAB's law is currently under consultation, and that will bring in statutory requirements for how social landlords deal with hazards, including damp and mould, within strict timescales. There is concern the impact this will have on resourcing, both diagnosing and completion of the repair. The Council is awaiting the outcome of the consultation by the regulator of social housing. So once that is known, then we may have to reflect the risk score there. Those were sort of the main sort of points to raise since the last update. Obviously, there were questions before the meeting, which I think they've all been covered. But if there's anything else, then we can take any more questions.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on to other questions, Mr. Al-Haq had put in a question that hasn't yet been answered, and I don't know, it relates, do you want to just say a little something about it really quickly? It's item number 29, so I don't know whether there's anything to be said on this now or if we could have an answer later, but it might need a slight explanation.
Yeah, so there is a news item where Council admits lack of control over payments. So payment was made to an individual without proper due diligence, and this happened in a Council. So I was just wondering that have we captured this in our, risk assessment, or what is our view? Like, I mean, is it what is our exposure to this risk, and have we considered this?
Can I just ask if you've got more? Because I'm a bit because I don't want to answer for the officers, but obviously we have audit procedures that look at payments as well. Do you have more specifics? Sounds like a very specific.
Yes. So this risk register is all about capturing the risk from different sources. So one of the news item that I think it appears last month, that a Council admit lack of control over payments. Some payments was made to individual, I think it's around 400-500K, without proper due diligence, and that was during pandemic. So I was just wondering that what is our exposure to this risk? If it can happen somewhere else, it can happen here as well. So have we considered that in our risk assessment? And I provided the link to that as well.
Yeah, may I? Sorry, if I
Yes,
through the chair.
yes.
Was that specifically pandemic related? Or are you thinking?
No, it's payment made during pandemic to an individual. So during pandemic, I think in a lot of instances, payment was made with limited due diligence. So there can be an instance of irregularities or whatever. But that is a news item. So I was just wondering if we have, yeah.
I'm sorry, Chair. I didn't actually realise that's what that question meant, so thank you for teasing that out. I'm not aware of any issues on the COVID grants at Crawley. So, and I've been here for a year, so we haven't got that particular issue at Crawley, no. I mean, it's obviously always possible to make an incorrect payment, but there are I mean, for sort of ordinary, you know, purchases, they get approved by officers, and obviously you only approve the ones that, you know, where that you've ordered, and they then go to that specific person. So for the sort of day-to-day stuff, that's sort of pretty locked down. But I think during COVID, I think there was the pressure to pay things quickly, wasn't there? But I mean, as far as I'm aware, we've had none of these issues at Crawley.
Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead. I was going to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were also saying this is where cases have been found during the pandemic, but your concern is more broad. It's like payments. I think it sounds like a question about our payments procedure, which I'm sure is audited.
To vendors.
And to payments to various vendors or individuals. But I believe that will have been audited. So any I would imagine that any procedures which don't look fully satisfactory would have been highlighted, I would have thought. Would you think so? Unless, this is what I was trying to work out exactly what you mean. If there's something which is unusual outside of, that we need to be alerted to. That's hence my wanting to tease that out a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what sort of our engagement was like in terms of making payment during pandemic. So I don't know. So I just get this news, and I thought we should look at it and see whether we have the risk of these things happen in our council as well. If it is not, then that's fine. If that is your view.
Probably would be helpful I don't think any of us have read the news items, so maybe it would be helpful to have a look at it just to make sure we've covered all bases in case there is something that suddenly pops up, and maybe, I don't know, suggest maybe reporting back if there is anything. Otherwise, saying no, we looked at it and looks fine. Would that be?
I think what I will do. So I'll answer that in just 1 second, because actually, what I want to say before we move on to general questions is that one of the recommendations of this report is to determine whether there are any matters in relation to the register which the committee would like to be drawn to the attention of the chief executive or cabinet. With this in mind, if you'd like a specific comment to be brought to their attention, please make this clear during the debate, and Mez will make a note for when we come to the vote. In that sense, it's perhaps something that we could at least raise, that to flag this news item to the cabinet or to the chief executive, or to have it sort of answered for us. Yes, Councillor Hillier.
Well, given none of us have seen the news report and it's highlighted here, if we could have an answer published in the councillor's information bulletin, I think that should give us an answer.
Okay. Yes.
I think in previous occasions when you've flagged an issue which isn't on the register, which you think we might want to consider, whether it be having come through the news or another council, I think what we've agreed to do is it's been flagged at CMT, at Corporate Management Team, to look at, and if it's considered to be a risk, it will go on the register, and if not, it won't. But we're quite happy to just come back to the committee by email either way and say, yeah, we're adding it or we're not. I think if it goes in the bulletin, it won't have any context. So we're happy to do that, I think. That gives us a bit of time to look at the article as well.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you. Are there any other questions on the risk management report from committee members? No? Okay, thank you. So all committee members have had the opportunity to speak. There are 2 recommendations set out in the report, and I will deal with these separately. I move recommendation 1, that the committee confirm its satisfaction with the risk management arrangements. May I ask the vice chair to second, please?
Julie seconded.
Okay. And may I have a show of hands, please, for the motion? Okay, so that's unanimous. And then that motion has therefore been carried, that recommendation. And recommendation 2 with regard to comments made during the debate, which we've just discussed, I therefore move that those comments be drawn to the attention of, I think we're going to say the CMT. And may I ask the Vice Chair to second? And may I have a show of hands for that motion, please? Yes, okay, that's unanimous, so that has carried as well. And thank you very much. We have one more item. Gosh, I missed something. Yeah, we have one more item, but before we move on to the approval of RIPA, which is item 12, I just want to say to the committee that before the next meeting when is our next meeting? July. Due to the number of reports that we consider, and often huge amounts of reading, and a lot of it is stuff that is obviously very important and complex and need to read through carefully. We did have a discussion at our pre-meeting, the Vice Chair and I, with officers and Democratic Services about the number of reports were being considered. And the committee will notice that the usual fraud and inspections team report has not been included on tonight's agenda. As I said, we've been in initial discussions about this, but there is a possibility that we will, the likelihood, I think, that we're going to be reducing the frequency at both which the fraud report and the risk management report are brought before the committee, given that the agendas are so full. It's recognized that both these reports provide updates on areas of importance, so between now and the July Audit Committee, the relevant heads of service, Democratic Services Officer, the Vice Chair, and myself will come to a solid and well thought out, thorough proposal for a way forward. Any proposed change will be brought to the committee for its approval. This is an information item only for the committee tonight, and I'm not planning on us having a discussion about it here, but it is, we will come forward with something to be approved that will allow us to, that will change the frequency of those two reports coming to committee, and that where we will set some parameters also around exception reporting for officers. So, we'll hear more about that later. Okay.
I know you were saying you didn't want a discussion on it, but I do recall the previous meeting, I think Councillor Belbin and both myself were extraordinarily grateful for the printed copies that we were offered. I wonder if that might be thrown into the mix. I personally find it very difficult going through ream after ream on a computer of financial data, probably because last time I did it, it was all paper-based. So if that could be thrown into the mix as well, that possibly some of, particularly the accounting stuff. Perhaps on request? Or we can book in a request that then remains while we're on the committee.
Thank you. I think that by request should be something that if a member puts in a request when they're on the committee, that be a rolling request for that member, that they have a printed copy of the reports. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes?
just on that, I think the point has been taken around the financial data. I think that's why we provided the hard copies for that. I think that's been shown to be valuable. In terms of paperless for other bits, I think we just need to be mindful of the overall paperless approach of the council, and obviously how that feeds into the climate change approach. So I think in terms of the financial data, I think that's probably something we'll do again when we need to. But otherwise, I think we can have a discussion to kind of square that off. But generally, if it's not financial, then we try to stick to paperless. Unless there are specific issues for the member, in which case they should contact me directly. Thanks.
Okay, I think people are happy with that. Yes, okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we move on to approval of RIPA, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 Policy and Updates, which starts on page 27 of the agenda pack. And Suraj, we're back to you. Thank you as Head of Governance, People and Performance to present this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So quite a heavy topic here for the last item. This is a report that the purpose of it is to ensure that the audit committee examines how we potentially use these powers. It's to note the outcome of recent inspection, which I'll come on to. A little bit of information about our usage data, which you would have seen is nil. And just to approve the reviewed corporate policy on RIPA in terms of procedure, which we've recently refreshed. So just to give you very briefly, the chair read out the Act, the Regulatory of Investigatory Powers. It's been around for 24 years now, but it governs how we obtain and disclose communications data, how we might go about using covert surveillance, and some councils use this more than others. It was used quite heavily when this Act first came out, and the Act was there to kind of regulate some of the activities and approaches to operations run by councils. This really just is about these powers potentially being used to prevent and detect crime. So, to give you a bit of context, officers at this council have not used these powers in the last 4 years. So it's very difficult to say that we're doing it well as such, because we're not really using it. But it's important that if we are called upon by whatever situation it might be in terms of enforcement, that we are ready, kind of trained, and have the right tools in place and process in place to make sure that we do it properly. So the policy is there, it's quite detailed, apologies for that, but it sets out how officers would go about getting the proper authorisation within the organisation from set authorised persons, and then the process for following up that authorisation by getting an order from the Magistrates Court. So I mentioned a recent inspection. So these are normally kind of annual or biannual, and they kind of would come out on site. I say, come and visit the office and talk to us and check all our documentation. This year or last year, the end of 2023, they put to us a set of questions as a kind of light touch to check that we had the right things in place. We were able to satisfy their questions to show that we were doing things properly or had the right things in place to do things properly, and as such they didn't require a detailed on-site inspection. So that's good news, positive, and the next inspection is due in 2026. So by that time, who knows, we may well have used the powers. Again, it depends on the nature of what's happening out in the borough in terms of incidents, types of activities, things that we are particularly looking to enforce. So it's difficult to predict how much this would be used. But in terms of the policy, we've refreshed that. We've got some training to do for some of our authorised officers within the organisation, because of a change of personnel. We've got 2 new heads of service who are authorised officers. So we'll make sure that training occurs. But apart from that, as I've said in the paper, there are very limited changes to the policy. There's a slight change around how we would go about acquiring communications data, because there's a new process where we would go through the National Anti-Fraud Network to go about getting that kind of data. But other than that, they're very minor changes to the policy, which was last kind of reviewed about 3 or 4 years ago. And I believe there was one question on this which pointed out a typographical in I don't know the reference, but it's mentioned Chichester District Council, and that's because they did a very good policy, and I borrowed their section on communications data. So that will be amended to Crawley Borough Council to reflect our position. Thanks.
Okay, and Council, if any committee members have any questions, thank you very much for presenting that. I believe I know what you're going to talk about, maybe.
You might do. They sound
Okay.
very good of you.
Well, no, if you don't, then I need to remember, because we had a discussion
We had
about.
a discussion. That was one of the things.
Okay,
I had
good.
a couple more questions.
Good,
as
good.
well, but that
Okay,
one-
we'll go
Yeah.
with the Vice Chair, Council Chairman. I just wanted to remind.
No, I hadn't forgotten. Thank you. So yes, in our pre-meet, we talked about, and I was, the question really is an update on what we talked about there, and what we mentioned there was I had a slight concern, more than a slight concern, about democratic oversight of this process. And I think you agree that you were going to consider how members or cabinet members, if nobody else, how that process would work with cabinet members. Obviously, I think you pointed out that seeking approval from a member or cabinet members would be operationally difficult because you need the speed and flexibility. But it's making sure that we do have, again, we have that democratic oversight of the process. I was wondering if that was one of my questions. I do have a couple more questions as well. Do you want to answer that one? And
I'll
then
just come back on that. Yeah, I mean, as is set out in the policy and indeed the legislation, in terms of the council doing this properly, i.e. sticking to the law and ensuring that the people's rights are protected. Obviously, there's the authorisation internally through senior officers, and then the second. I'll be careful to use the word approval. The second order, which comes from the magistrates' court. So there is a set scrutiny of that process. In terms of democratically, I think it's fair where a head of service authorises this kind of activity that they will inform their portfolio holder that this kind of activity is taking place, because it's quite rare. As I've mentioned, we've not used it in the last 4 years. So if an operation like this is occurring, most likely the portfolio holder should be made aware. So yeah, I can certainly build that into the training, and I can slip something in the policy, I'm sure, in terms of making sure that portfolio holders are informed of powers when they are approved. Maybe not necessarily of everyone that is applied for, because they may not all get approved, but certainly ones that get approved and that are where there's going to be an operation, then yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll hopefully see some updates in the documents. Okay. Shall I ask my other couple of questions? Is that
Yes,
all right?
please.
Okay. It's probably what's the word? It's probably suggested in what you've been saying in terms of the approval, the review that we already had. But I just wanted to double check that GDPR and the human rights, that our procedures agree with GDPR in terms of the length of data and the kind of data we collect, what we do with that data, who gets access to it, the length of time we store it, and so on, in our covert surveillance. And secondly, whether any of we've also assured ourselves that none of our procedures all of our procedures rather are compliant with human rights legislation, current human rights legislation. That was one of my questions. And also I wanted to double check, we do covert surveillance only when all other avenues have been exhausted. I take it. So in other words, we're not, we do this with great reluctance, as it were, when we can find no other means to gather the information we need. Is that correct?
Come back on those 2 points, Chair. So first, in terms of GDPR and retention, yeah, I mean, when the council obtains data by whatever means, that data immediately becomes subject to the council's retention policies. So pretty much every type of data across all its services has kind of been identified and assigned a retention period. So it would fall in like any other data the council holds. It would be subject to that. So by getting this data via these means, through these powers, how we then store it, use it, share it, is all governed by data protection legislation. So,
before you continue, I was going to say, so effectively that means if the person being surveilled, if that's the correct word, would have access to question and query the data that you have within the provisos of GDPR.
they might put a query, but we would most likely use an exemption around not sharing information if it's still subject to an investigation or criminal proceedings. So we wouldn't be divulging something which would jeopardise a potential, say, prosecution. So is that okay on that point?
It is. I mean, I just wanted to ensure that we, obviously that in terms of judicial process, that we are compliant and that we're not putting the person being surveilled. God, I don't like that word. Under some sort of disadvantage because we hold information they don't have access to. But if it's within the judicial framework of this country, then that's what it is. What it is. Right?
Yeah. Okay. I'm fairly confident in saying that. To address your other point, human rights legislation, to be clear, the application will be made by, say, the investigating officer. The senior officers who are approving, they will apply a test to this. So there's a threshold to meet to be able to get one of these authorisations, and human rights of the person involved will be considered. But the very fact that there's legislation to allow this sort of thing, it means that as long as you're meeting the basic tests within the legislation, then you are allowed to conduct those powers. But it is a case by case, so it's not just a standard yes, I ask and you'll get the approval. The officers will have to make the case because it will be tested, as I said, by the magistrates. And if the magistrates aren't happy and they think it's been granted too lightly, they will revoke it. So, it has to be done properly.
I suppose that, sorry,
Yes.
I don't want to monopolise it, but I suppose that begs the question is, should a magistrate revoke the covert surveillance? What happens to the data then? What position does that leave? I'm looking at a very extreme example, but since you raise it, I guess I've got to ask the question, is what does happen in those circumstances?
It's a good question. The council would get, I think it's something like 3 working days or business days to go back and make representations to try and explain why they made the decision. You'd hope that we'd be able to convince the magistrates, but if not, and we had an order saying we shouldn't have done it, I imagine that we'd be ordered to delete the data, and if we weren't, I'm pretty sure we would anyway. So, yeah, that's why, as long as we follow this, and make sure that the authorisations aren't given too lightly, I think we should probably stay on the right track. And I think the other one you mentioned about covert surveillance, absolutely, as I mentioned, there's a threshold. One of the things would be to say that that kind of evidence that we were seeking to obtain could be obtained by any other means. So it would kind of be the last resort, but in some situations it would be fairly obvious that the only way to get the evidence would be through covert means. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do any other committee members have any questions on this item? No? Okay, I have just one. It's kind of more of a comment, but it's a question as well. You mentioned about having some new people in position who will need training. Presumably that's going to happen as soon as possible, because I could just imagine a scenario where we haven't used it in 4 years and all of a sudden something comes up where we really urgently need to use it and they aren't trained up. But I assume that will be happening as their part of their initial sort of, or as soon as possible within their training.
Well, what we'll do is source the specialist trainers in this particular subject. We normally combine with some neighbouring districts and get a few people trained up in one batch. But our main authorised officer, which is the chief exec, has done the training and is equipped. But yes, we'll be trying to get the others trained up as soon as possible. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I assumed if nothing else, it falls to the chief executive, but, all right. Just once again, no other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much for that report as well. All committee members have had the opportunity to speak. The recommendations are that the committee note the outcome of the recent inspection, note the usage of RIPA during 2021-2023, approve the reviewed council corporate policy and procedural guidance with the inclusion of the clerical correction relating to the name of the council, And then we have an additional item D, as we've discussed here this evening, that the cabinet member, relevant cabinet member, be informed when it has been agreed that RIPA powers have been approved for use within their area. Do we all agree with those now 4 recommendations? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. The recommendations have therefore been carried. And we do not have a supplemental agenda this evening. Therefore, business of the committee is concluded, and the meeting is now closed at 8:31 p.m. Thank you all very much.
If people could just bear with me whilst I just go and stop the live stream. Thank you.